Hello and welcome to Tournament Poker Project from Essex. My name's Jon.
And I'm the Tain.
And we are two recreational poker players, and this is our podcast documenting the journey to being able to play poker at the World Series of Poker. We are still quite near the start, but when do we start? April. So April, May, June, July. Well, I don't know when this is going to air exactly because we've got 20 recordings now, Tain, and we haven't put any online. But let's just say it's August still. I don't know when you're listening to this, but we're recording in August, so we've been going a few months now, and I would say we've made some pretty good progress, right?
Yeah, 100%. My game has improved infinitely. I'd hate to think I never properly quantified what my losses were, especially as most of my game was playing live, where I'll win a good, £100, £200 here and there, and I wouldn't pay any attention to how much I was losing. Sometimes I'd just put that £100 in my wallet and then it would disappear one way or another.
At the bar.
But now I'm actively quantifying my wins and my losses, not to the number, but as in it's ring fence money that I don't spend on anything else. And I haven't reloaded since one of our very early episodes.
That's amazing.
So
that's really good.
I feel better about it. I don't feel that I'm on a good run. In fact, at the moment, I feel I'm on a bad run and I'm still doing all right. But still 100.
But it's not your fault, right? It's just the card distribution, surely.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get the right. Like, I now know when I'm on a bad run because, for instance, I'll get nice hands like 9-10 suited, but it'll be under the gun when I've only got 18 big blinds left, and you can't be doing anything with that kind of hand. And I think, well, it's all right if I get that kind of hand when I'm on the button and it gets folded to me, and then it gets folded to me, and
18 big blinds under the gun, 9-10 suited. That's an opening hand. GTO says open with that mother. That's like the bottom. That is the bottom of the opening range, but that is in there. Just for your information.
I've got it from the Ace video book as not in the opening range.
Jeez.
Actually, it is right on the cusp. My apologies. So it only gives you 15 and 25 big blinds, and at 25 big blinds, it's just above the bottom of the range. It's still got a point of indifference, but it's just above. And at 15 big blinds, it's not there. 10-9 is the point of indifference. So it is very, very cuspy. But the game that I was playing is extremely coolly. Although I was listening to our good friends over at the Thinking Poker Pod, and they do their daily pod. And I'm going to call him my mate Carlos, having never met the fella, and
Carlos
he wouldn't know him. Carlos Welch, but I love the guy. He's given me a fantastic little bit of play for that, which is the open limp, but just seeing it for what it is and why. Basically, he noticed something that I'd noticed as well, but he come up with the counter. So in these games, if the first person just limps, the people behind will also limp.
All right.
Yet, if the first person does a raise, 2 to 3 times the big blinds, people will still limp behind. They'll just call that raise, but they're indifferent to the fact that you are under the gun and you opened. So your best counter to that is you limp. You let them do all the limping because they rarely raise it, and then you free bet the living crap out of them as soon as someone else does raise. Like 4-bet, sorry, and then you really hammer it that way. I mean, it's a bit dangerous because there are times that you've got a strong hand and your open limp doesn't get raised. But the times it does, you 4-bet it, go to town, and you get much better results. And I can understand that would really, really work in the games that I'm playing because they don't like 3-bets. They certainly don't like 4-bets. And I'm only, because you're under the gun, you're only doing it with hands that you don't care if you get shoved all in on. So when you 4-bet and they go, I ain't going to fold, you're all right. it's not a bad thing. You was only raising with 5-10% of your range in that position in that way anyway.
I get it. Oh well, thank you, Carlos Welch. That is another nugget. And shout out to the Thinking Poker podcast, Andrew Brocus and Carlos Welch, legends. A big part of our listening, both of us, isn't it? We both listen to that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of words of wisdom. Okay, well, so I've been looking at this week. Actually, I've not done loads of study. I've still been practicing daily my opening ranges. So I know most of the opening ranges now. I'm starting to incorporate some of the, like in the red zone when you've got like just 15 big blinds or whatever. I know what hands to raise with, like what offsuit hands to raise with, for example, and I know which ones to then go all in with. But there's also some extra ones that you raise again with, like, so for instance, if you've got like ace, you might raise ace king all in with ace 7 to ace queen, but then you might also then raise again with ace 6 and ace 5 for some reason. So I've started learning some extra bits like that, starting to learn some of the extra kings and queens that you play at the bottom of those ranges, stuff like that. But what I've been practicing this week, and I've played 3 of them on PokerStars, I've been playing 18-handed sit and goes. I say 18-handed. There's obviously 2 tables, but 18 runners. So two tables. I don't know what you call it. Is it a 2-table sit and go? I don't know if you call it that, but it's basically 2 tables. And the reason I'm doing that is because I seem to be getting really far in tournaments quite a lot, and I'm finding myself on the final 2 tables, quite regularly, which is great. So I've obviously, improved. But it seems to be a bit of a different game when you get down to that level. It's you can still just play your GTO, opening ranges and whatever, but you've got to consider a lot of other things. Like when say you get to a final table, it's not like starting a 9-handed sit and go where everyone's got equal stack depths. You've got really wildly varying stack depths, and it does change the dynamics. So whether you open with a certain hand or not isn't as straightforward when you've got someone after you that is, looking for a double up or looking to just chuck all their chips in for one reason or another. And it really changes the dynamic. So I've just been playing these 18-runner 2-table sit and goes to just practice those final stages of a tournament. And so far, some good success. I've only got 3 games I've played, but I've cashed in all 3 of them. So I came 4th twice and 2nd once, which I was really, really pleased with. And I feel like it's just given me a better understanding of maybe not the first when you're still on 2 tables, but once you get down to 1 table, you still have that really varying chip stacks. So it kind of simulates a final table quite well without having to get through 400, 500 runners to actually play it, which isn't going to happen every time, obviously. So it allows me to practice more a closer simulation to a final table.
What do you feel is the biggest difference between them? Like when you get to that final 2, 3, 4 tables of a massive, 100, 200, 500, 1,000 runner MTT, do you reckon it's fatigue? Is it that the prizes are there and the other people are playing differently? Is it that your stacks are massive, even though the blinds are as well?
I think it's that. I think the way people are playing it feels like it's really different. It feels like some people really know what they're doing. Oh, I'm getting a serious echo off your. Could you mute it a sec? Sorry. I feel like some people have really got a good understanding of just playing a strong game when it gets to those last few tables, but then others seem to just be not adjusting at all. And then you can pick out some people that just seem to be folding everything, like they're almost just, they want that extra like $2 or $3 to get from 18th to 17th, and it's and it's just, I suppose it's just learning to adjust to quite a different environment. and different types of people that are playing at the table, and they're different kind of objectives for that game. So yeah, I can't put my finger on it yet. I can't say that, yeah, I've got the formula, I understand it all now, but I feel like if I just expose myself to it more by playing these, you know, couple of table games, I'll be on that final table, in inverted commas, more, and then it'll just get me used to it, and I'll start to pick up sort of understanding of it that way. I'm sure there's a book I could read or some stuff I could look at online as well, but yeah, I just like exposing myself to it as well. What about you? What's the latest with you? What you've been learning?
Well, I've been looking at the range charts as well. I've been trying to pick them up in a different way to you, just because my ADHD memory won't allow to memorize the ranges in the same way, because I'll end up confusing them at the wrong time, or there'll be an adjustment I need to make and I'll fall to pieces, or I'll end up pushing out good information just trying to remember a chart. So I'll finally get that done. I mean, what should happen is that it becomes muscle memory as I practice and practice and practice. But I can't. I as much as I can try, it's difficult for me to learn it verbatim and use it as a proper good base. So I need to try to find different ways of learning. Okay. So I've been trying to pick apart ranges and work out why each part of the range is there. Because for the most part, you think, okay, so you're raising 25 big blinds, you're raising 16.8% of the strongest hands. And it gives you the little arrow, and you think, okay, well, the reason you're raising that is simply because they're the strongest 16, 17%. But the thing is with GTO, that's actually not the case. Each part of that range is there for a specific reason, some of which are very different to other cards that are in that range. And once I've got my head around that, it doesn't matter as much that I might have made a mistake and King 8 was the bottom of my range and it should have been King 6. Okay, so there will be a bit of loss there, but I'm playing King 6 and King 7, King 8, and they will be in my range for the right reasons. So it's not as important.
Okay.
They're not going to feature highly enough, and because I'm doing the right things with them, it's a very difficult thing for someone to take advantage of. Okay. Whereas if I'm deciding that I'm going to start throwing the biggest one that I notice is the offsuits. So ace 5 offsuit, for instance. If I start throwing that around from any position, that's going to be very costly. Whereas if I might accidentally put Jack 9 suited when the bottom of my range should have been Queen 9 suited, I'm not going to see too much of an EV loss there. But I know why Jack 9 and Queen 9 are in the range in the first place. And my adjustments need to be position, stack, and opponent. So it's kind of working, but it's very difficult to build a range in that way, because trying to do it like that means that you need to know the whole picture all at once for all the reasons, for all the adjustments, and then start constructing that as from that point on. So it's like being given a house and someone just says, well, there's all the bricks and all the cement and mortar and all the joinings and everything, put it together. And it's like, okay, kind of need to piece it together bit by bit. And they're like, well, you can't just build doors. You need your floors first. Does that make sense? It's really difficult to construct the entire house in one go, having not done that. But I'm building the pieces, and I think I'm getting there.
Okay.
And one thing I asked is if we, instead of doing the usual hand analysis to start with, if we can do range analysis. And look at it together that. And try to work out where we're at and why bits might be in our range, and use the different parts of what we've learned, how we've learned it.
Amazing. That sounds great. Yeah, let's dive in.
Cool. So apologies for those listening in. I am sharing Flopzilla with John, and this is basically what I thought we should do is start with the two very different ranges that are most commonly, well, not most commonly, sorry, that are quite commonly seen in tournaments. I was going to go 25 big blinds and 60 big blinds, because below 25 big blinds, you need to incorporate an all-in range, which isn't a problem, but there's not much science to the all-in. You're playing it with your best hands, and certain, there's a little bit of balance, but there's not much more to it. Because you're shoving, you're doing it because you get to realize your equity a lot better because your chips are all in. I've also not considered the blinds, because the blinds playing are very different to everyone else. They've got very few people to act behind. They've already got a commitment to the pot. That is also the case for the button somewhat, but the button is the last standard. They've not got an investment, albeit they've got the best position. So there are reasons, but that's something to talk about, where position for the button is essential to what they're doing with their 25 big blind and 60 big blind ranges, compared to under the gun, who's got the opposite. He's got all the problems of everyone at the table. So again, only looking at raise first in, because as soon as you get to defense, it becomes GTO hardcore, rather than here's a list of good things, good reasons why we might want to look at each range.
So if I understand it properly, then we're more going to look now then at the reasons for having certain holdings within your range.
Yes. So every single range you look at, even though all it looks like is the top strongest hands, there are certain categories that every single part of that range will fall into. It might be that some sort of straddle one or two different categories, but for the most part, they'll fall into one or two of the categories, and then the rest of your range will be another category. So just to go through, and this is my general understanding, when you're looking at a range chart, so you've got your aces top left corner, and then down the first column, it goes all your offsuit aces, ace king, ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, and then along the top, you've got all your suited aces, ace king down to ace two suited, and then there's a diagonal running through the middle from the top left, which is your aces, all the way down to your bottom right, which is twos. And you kind of cross-reference all of them to incorporate every possible holding that you could have, both suited and offsuit. So within that, you should have, in some way or form, no matter what position you're in, no matter what stack size you're in, you're playing cards that have high raw equity. So they're the most obvious. They're going to be your aces, your kings, your ace king suited. And
what was it? Would you say that's high equity?
High raw equity. Yeah. So they're the best. They're the strongest hands. They're the ones that are going to win the most money, regardless of every other thing. Okay. So yeah, starting with aces, it's just the top one. So I'm not actually including ace queen suited. I'm not including ace king offsuit. They pretty much will be the highest raw equity in almost every single case. But as stack sizes and positions and everything changes, then they come and go. So they can go up and down. But the main key ones are your ace king suited, aces and kings.
So this is your high raw equity hands. Okay.
Yeah, they're the ones you want to play just because they're the best hands. There are other hands that have raw equity, but I'll come on to them in a minute. Then you've got the ones that have got good blockers. So you might imagine ace seven suited to not have that much equity. Other people might be holding an ace, but the fact is you've got an ace in front of you, so your opponent's less likely to hold an ace. And if they don't hold an ace or a pair, you've got good equity. You will be in front, albeit not by much. So you've got a blocker to their ace. And it's the same for the stronger kings, like especially the Broadway kings, king jack, king 10. So they're not solid hands, but it's less likely your opponent's going to have ace king or king queen or a pair of kings, because you've got that kings. So that's a decent part of your range.
So what do we call this part of the range?
So they're just they're good blockers. So they're half decent hands that also block your opponent from having half decent hands.
Okay.
But they're also made up of other ones. So they're just basically any hands that's got a Broadway as a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have good equity but poor realization.
But just to clarify, if it's queen 4 suited, that doesn't qualify, does it?
that would, if that's a part of your range, there's the likelihood is queen 4 suited in your range because the queen counts as a blocker. You should be playing a really wide range at that point anyway. And if they're going to have a king or an ace, they're going to do, because they know your range is wide, that actually becomes part of their re-raising range. So the queen 4, which is what I get onto in a mo actually, is fairly good equity because against any two cards, queen 4 is in the top 50%. So if you go to showdown 100% of the time against any card, queen 4 suited should come out on top more often than not, but it's not going to call a shove, and it doesn't perform well post flop. So but it's in your range because you need cards in your range that you will raise with, because it will get folds, but it will also fold if they show any aggression, or you don't mind, you know exactly what to do. It's easy to play post flop because for the most part you're folding and you need a good reason to call or raise, and when you're given that reason you realize a bit more equity. Then you got the ones that have got good equity but they don't realize that equity enough, but they would call a shove. So this is the classic, we hear it down the pub all the time, everyone hates playing tens and jacks because they're meant to be a strong hand, but most people lose with them. But that's because people are playing them wrong. They're playing a pair of jacks in the same way they'll play a pair of kings and aces, but that's not how you should be playing jacks. You should be playing jacks to either get all the chips in as soon as you can, so you can get to realize your equity because all the chips are in, or you can understand your opponent and post flop play well enough to know when you're ahead and when you're not. Any other time, jacks aren't particularly strong hands. There's 3 other cards I
don't know that. How do you play jacks? It's always one that baffles me. So what should you do in the most part?
From the way that I've kind of, because it's not that I play jacks well, the way that I try to visualize it is you've got your aces and kings. They play in a very specific way, which is premium until the ball starts connecting up. So they play premium up to the flop. Post flop, you need a good reason to think that your aces and kings are still good. So they're good up to the flop. So if you can get all your chips in up to the flop, you're good. Queens, I'd group in with jacks, tens, and nines. And if you look at how would you play nines, there's not many reasons why you wouldn't play tens, jacks, and queens in the same way, because the only way you're playing them is with a flop that's not overly connected, that's low, against opponents that aren't likely to be playing low cards. So you can start putting them on hands. It's like, okay, well, you free bet me pre-flop, so you're definitely not going to be sitting there with 7-4. So my queens are probably good here. Whereas when the flop comes out, ace, king, 6.
Someone is 3-bet away. Probably, okay, gotcha.
And that's how I try to do it. So even though queens are stronger than nines, it's only stronger because you get to open up slightly bit more of the flop and the turn. There's more that can come that benefits you, but you're not playing it like you've got the winning hand right off the bat, which when you've got aces, you look down and you think, okay, I've won this hand, how do I get value out of it? And you shouldn't be thinking that unless you've got a stack which is easy to get in the middle. And that's the big difference. So if you've got 25 big blinds or less with queens, jacks, and tens, you should be thinking, how can I get all this money straight in the middle? Because if you did it pre-flop, you'd be good most of the time.
Okay.
Well, it depends on toner, but the quicker you can get them chips in, the better it is for that kind of hand. Whereas aces and kings have got a bit more playability. They can extract a bit more value from draws and other things.
Except if you've got jacks on the button and under the gun raises, under the gun +1 re-raises, and then under the gun +2 jams all in, then you might consider folding your jacks, right?
Yes.
I mean, I would. Depends on the stack sizes. Depends on the stack sizes. If you were deep enough, I would consider that.
Yeah, the truth is that you are folding jacks in that position. There are certain times that you might think otherwise, like you're massive and you've got them covered, or you've got reason to believe they're taking each other's cards. So if there's three
Yeah.
players and you know they're only ever playing aces, kings, and ace king, and all three of them are throwing their chips around, there's a slight chance that they're all nicking each other's cards, and you're actually not in terrible shape. But at the same time, you probably need to improve, and the chances of doing that with jacks is bad. You're better off calling with jack 10 suited than you are with jacks, very much.
Okay.
But they're not to suggest that you should call with jack 10 suited, just to say it's better than.
Okay. All right.
Cool.
So we've got.
There,
So just talk me through
Sorry,
it from the top. We've got these high raw equity hands, pocket aces, pocket kings. We've got the good blocker type hands, which is, anything with a Broadway card in it, basically. And then what's the jacks, tens, nines? What is that? It's good equity, but not raw equity. What are we calling that range, or what that part of the range?
they've got good raw equity, but they've got poor realization. So there is maths that you can do on this, but it's unnecessarily complex. And the idea being that if jacks are meant to win the pot 70% of the time, given their strength, they rarely get to the river 70% of the time and win, because they're normally outmaneuvered. An ace will come and they'll throw it away, despite the fact that their opponents, an ace is only 10% of the opponent's range, that kind of thing. It's too easy to not get value out of that kind of hand. Like, the best ones are.
Is there something we call that part of the range? Has it got a name, or are we just sort of talking through it at the minute?
Just good equity, poor equity realization.
Poor equity realization. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Good raw equity, poor realization. Gotcha. All right. It's making sense.
Cool. But they specifically need good equity, because other hands like 7-2 offsuit, even though that's the worst hand, it still has bad equity realization, because even if you hit the 7 or the 2, you probably still fold in your 7-2. It's just such a bad hand. It's got bad equity realization. Whereas there's other hands that have unnecessarily high equity realization that are on the flip of that. But for the most part, it's the good hands that you're going to be playing. Ace queens, ace king suited, all the same. But the other point is that they would call a shove. So if you've raised, so you've got your jacks in raise first in, it's in your range. They're also in your calling 4-bet range, which, for instance, 25 big blinds might be you're calling a shove, because they've got enough good equity, unless you've got reads or the person who's raising is doing something. They're much more likely to call a shove, because they've got this raw equity that's valuable.
Okay. All right then. Fine. And what about all the low pairs then? So 8s down.
The low pairs would be the same one. So good equity, poor realization would call a shove. And the only difference is that their equity becomes less and less and less based on position, because there's just too many variables. That the more people to act behind you, the harder it is for a pair of 7s to have equity in the pot. They don't have the initial equity. So even though 7s will probably be ahead versus king queen suited and, I don't know, ace 7 off, that's because there's 2 opponents with 4 cards against both of them, your equity's going down and down. But they do feature, and they might call a shove. So one of the peculiarities of GTO, when you look at these ranges, is that when you've got a very short stack, things like pocket pairs become really powerful, because you're so often getting your chips in. You're going to realize the value that they've got, because you're going to be good most of the time. Whereas when you then start getting up in chips, the pocket pairs really drop in value, because you're very unlikely to get it all in, but there's not enough. You've not got enough chips to pay off a set. It's really difficult for a pair of 4s to ever realize their value. But then when you go up deeper and deeper and deeper to like 100 big blinds, they get their value back, because even though a pair of 4s is very rarely going to win, when they do hit their set, it's so well hidden, you might get all 100 blinds off your opponent, and
That makes sense.
that makes up for all the times that they lose. So they kind of go, they shrink and then they head back down. But for the most part, the 3s and 2s are just off the cards. Pardon the pun. But the 4s, 5s, 6s, they're the ones that kind of come and go, depending on where you're sitting, what the chip stack is, and what you're looking to do with them. But again, it is that they've got raw equity. It's more they're only in the hands depending on how likely it is that you can get all your chips in and how quickly you can do that.
So pairs of jacks is at the top of the, pairs of jacks downwards in the pocket pairs are the poor equity realization hands, basically.
Yeah, I'd say queens are in that a bit too.
Yeah. Okay.
Not yet. Queens come and go. Like queens are the kind of the decision point on them. Obviously, everyone knows kings are great and aces are the best, but jacks and below, for the most players, are difficult to get what they're really worth. Then you've got the ones that have got good equity, poor realization, but also wouldn't call a shove. So what's a good example of that? So these suited connectors, I think, fall into that range. They're actually got fairly decent equity, something like 9-10, Jack 10 suited. But you're expecting to hit a flop strong for them to pay out, and you're not calling a shove with them. So you need to play them in a specific way that you get the maximum value from them, but you're also folding them quite a lot.
And what is that way? Do you know what the way is? Because that's really interesting. So, it makes sense. They pay out big, and if you were to get all in pre-flop, they could be good, but it's one of those holdings that you need to get to the river.
Yeah, so this is the bit that I'm learning a bit more about, because I'm not fully into the defense side of it and the post-flop side of it. It's trying to work out exactly how they realize their value. At the moment, I feel that it's playing when you're very deep, because that way, when they are exceptionally strong, you're getting more value for the chips. So it makes it more valuable the times that you're not going to realize that. But I also think that they play a big part in kind of your bluff range. So you don't really want to have the strongest hands in your bluff range, because they're not bluffs, they're strong. But you also don't want to have a whole bunch of rubbish that's in your bluff. So if you have something like Jack 9 suited it's not a bluff because it's got some good equity, it's never going to call a shove, it's probably not going to play too well if you raise it and you get a caller, especially like from early, for instance. But if you do raise, you'll get enough folds from the raise that will be enough profit anyway. It plays fairly well post flop, whereby when you miss the board, it's easy to fold. You just think, okay, well, you showed that you had a decent hand because you called my raise. So now the flops come out. I need to play this very carefully, because if I completely miss it, I am bluffing into a better hand, essentially. I need to be confident you're folding, as well as you need bluffs from somewhere, and having a hand that can hit straights and flushes is a good place to start. And the higher value they are, the more strength they have. So you're not playing, 4-5 suited, where even if you hit the straight, you're probably the wrong end of it. Or if you hit your flush, there's every chance someone's got a better one. The higher up you go, the more likely when you do hit, you're the best part of it.
Okay.
But they're just below the hands that stand alone without the need to be connected and suited. So even though Queen King suited is both connected and suited, the fact that it's a king and the fact that it's a queen probably is enough to stand on its own 2 feet against most hands. It's then got all 3 of them, and it makes it exceptionally strong.
Okay.
Is that making sense?
Yeah.
So,
that sounds good.
So this is things that I am sort of learning, trying to meander. So this is why I really liked putting this call together, because it's helping me talk through, as much as it feels like here's things I'm learning and I'm speaking them to you, I need to speak these out loud to try to understand the bits that are gappy in what I know and try to piece it together with what you know and how that fits in with what we change at different stack depths. But we'll get onto the stack because that's the next interesting bit, how this changes with different stack depths and how that's important to us. Finally, the last two categories are the raise fold range.
Wait a minute, what are the low suited connectors called?
I have put them as, so the low suited connectors are okay equity, poor realization. So I wouldn't class them as good equity. The only time you're really putting in your low suited connectors is when you've got enough value hands above them. You're already playing a really wide range. So something like Jack 9 isn't a good equity, poor realization hand. That's actually more of just a good strength hand because you're playing such a wide range, because I'm assuming like you've only got the blinds to play, or you're in the small blind and you've only got the big blind to play. Jack 9 is actually an excellent hand regardless of anything else. It's a good equity hand. So you need less equity hands that are your bluffs. So all that is that them smaller connectors are your Jack 9 suited, your Jack 10 suited, your Queen 9 suited, but much lower down, because your Queen 9 is now actually a really strong hand on its own 2 feet. Does that make sense? So this is where the chip depth, the chip stacks makes a big difference. So the deeper you go, it might be doesn't necessarily widen your range, but it means what you're trying to do and how much value you can get, or also where your position makes a big difference as well. So the later you are with fewer people to act, your range becomes much wider. So you need to start adding in these hands as the bluffs and as the slower play. See how it goes. See if you fold to the initial raise, and if you don't, I might still get some equity here. Then you've got some hands which are just simply there for raise fold reasons.
So this is the next part of the range, is it? A raise fold.
Yeah. Part. So the ones that have got good equity but poor realization, the reasons they're there is that they do have some equity. So even when you're called, you've got that to rely on. As I said, it might be their connectivity. It might be that they've got a Broadway card as well. Whereas the raise fold hands is a bit more raw bluff. So you are raising them pretty much with the intention of either winning it there or getting folds. And that is sort of connected. They're sort of made up of the other hands as well. I think the raise fold hands are generally, for my thinking, is when you're raising such a wide part of your range, you're now putting the cards in like 10-6 suited that really don't, they're not fitting into much else. And you're thinking, well, why am I playing 10-6 suited if it doesn't have any equity and doesn't have any good realization? It's like, well, you can play that wide because you've got such good positional advantage. You've got so few players to act. You're going to win enough pots. So you are raising them, but the only thing you're doing with them is getting folds and folding it yourself. You're doing nothing else. But you need them in your hand so that people know that you have things that are foldable. So otherwise they're just going to continue. If you're never going to fold, they're only ever going to call you, or they're only ever going to fold their stronger hands. And you don't really want that. You want to get value out of your strong hands as well.
I see. So if they see sometimes that you actually opened with 10-6 suited, they are more likely to call you with Jack 10 suited when you've actually got Ace King, Ace Queen as well.
Yeah, exactly that. But the thing that them players often miss is that you were playing Jack 10 suited, 10-6 suited very specifically. There is a way that you were playing it. There's some that you knew exactly when to fold it. You knew exactly what kind of flops were the only type you'd continue on. So even though they saw that you were playing that hand, they didn't see that you were never going to be playing other cards in that way, or you are playing other cards in the exact same way, but that's why you're doing it. I'm playing 10-6 suited in this way because I would also play ace-8 suited in this way. And you don't know which one I've got, because ace-8 might have you crushed and 10-6 you're miles ahead of. So where am I? And it's that kind of unexploitable. And then the very last part of the range is simply board coverage. In some instances, especially when you're playing a very small part of the boards, you can't simply play the strongest hands, your aces, your ace kings, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 suited, because it's just too transparent. So you have to have a low ace in there. You have to have a middling pocket pair in there. You have to have a suited connector somewhere. You need to have some blockers. You because that way, otherwise, it's exactly what we just spoke about. You become too transparent. So you're under the gun, and you're only ever raising with the top 10%, 5% of your hands. You might as well play with your cards up. Whereas if you're raising with the top 5% of your hands, but you're also playing with fives or sixes or 8-7 suited, no matter what flop comes out, this could be the time that you just hit middle set. This could be the time that you've actually just spiked a really unusual straight that no one's ever going to put you on because they think you're only actually playing ace king suited in that place. So yeah, you're doing this so it is kind of a bluff, but it's not got much equity beyond they're fairly all right cards. They perform well on certain boards, but you need them there to cover up for the good hands that you've got. But you have far fewer board coverage cards than you do actual strong cards. You don't need anywhere near as many bluffs as you do value hands, but you do need them there.
How are we differentiating between the hands that sit in the raise fold part of the range and the board coverage part of the range?
So the board coverage part of the range are there. The board coverage do a lot more work post flop, whereas the raise folds might only be there pre flop to make up part of your raising range.
So can you name some hands that would go into board coverage? Sorry.
Yeah, so a really good example would be the best example I can think is a small B big blind, for instance. I believe that the suited aces, for the most part, would be calling because they're so strong. But the offsuit aces, almost all of them would be raising. And that's the perfect balance. So they never know if it's a suited ace or an offsuit ace, or even if they knew that you were raising your offsuit aces and calling with your suited aces, you're doing it with so many other hands that they're still in bad shape. Are you doing that with ace queen suited, or are you doing that with ace 2 suited? But the ace 9, the ace 8, and the ace 7, you also raise the suited one. So you raise ace 8 suited, even though you're calling with the rest of your suited aces, because that gives you a little bit more board coverage, but also it's the first part of your range which unblocks their best calling hands. So if you're playing ace 8 suited and you're the small blind playing the big blinds, everyone else is folded, they need something to be calling you with. And as soon as you get out of ace 10, you're not blocking any of the Broadway cards, and they're the best hands for you to call with. You want them to be calling with king 7, king 6, queen 8, because you're sitting there with the best ace that's also above that. Then it unblocks the cards you need calling by. So that then becomes a part of your calling, your raising range, but it's weaker than, say, your ace king off, which is also part of your raising range. And that's the kind of balance. So you'll play ace king offsuit in the same way you might play ace offsuit, but that's also the same way you might play nines. And then when it goes post flop, you kind of work out where you're at based on that. So if it's, and you'd play them three hands, for instance, quite similarly, because if the flop comes out really low, well, then you might be playing your nines, but you would also be playing your ace king that same way. Whereas if the flop comes out really high, you play your nines in the same way, because you'd play your ace king off in that way. And your nines might still be good because you're only playing one other person who is in the blind anyway. So your nines might be strong, but you also want to get value from your ace king. So you're playing both similarly. Does that make sense? So they both kind of work in tandem to give that equilibrium balance, but also completely disguise what you might have.
All right. Okay. I think I understand this. So we've got these 6 kind of different parts of your range, and you've still got your overall range, which is all the cards that are within the range, and it's a percentage of all possible, starting hands. And that we've broken that range down into different parts, so we kind of know what they are. So how do we use that? What do we do with that? Is that more for, right, we know that's part of our range, so we should open with it or go all in with it? And it's more just for the post-flop play. We then know, right, okay, well, we've raised with this low suited connector, but it's completely missed, and we're facing a big raise. It's time to just throw it away, or?
Yeah, so from the way my mind's working this out is, if we look at different positions, you've got all of them cards. I mean, a lot of them start merging because as your range gets smaller and smaller, your good blocker cards might also be your high raw equity cards, and the ones just below that are board coverage and your raise faults, because you're playing so few cards, they're going to start doubling up. But as you change position, and sometimes a little bit as you change chip stack, what your chip depth is, you start adding and taking away different parts of that to give you more coverage, and trying to know why you're doing that, in what position, why it's beneficial in that position. And then for me at least, I can start working out how to respond to things like free bets, because I know what part of my range in what position, so what's a good way? So if I go to the charts that I've got, so under the gun, 25 big blinds, you're raising just shy of 18% of your hands, and it goes down to, say, as low as King 7 suited. So I know that that's the bottom of the range. It's fairly weak. That's being raised because it's got good blocker value. The king is a fairly strong part. It's got a bit of equity, a bit of raw equity. It's rarely going to realise it being King 7, even though it's suited. So that's in my range. I know where the bottom of that is, and I know that that's in my range because I need blockers in there, and I need hands that aren't as strong that might still get folds. But then when you go all the way down to the button, playing the same chip depth, then all of a sudden the bottom of your range is massively wild, because all you've done is you added extra layers to go through. So even though King 7 was the bottom of the range, I'm now looking at Queen 3 suited, and that might be the same thing. I'm still doing with Queen 3 what I was doing with King 7, but I've added in because my range is so much wider, I've got a lot more cards that I'm doing this with.
So why have we widened the range? In what circumstance? I missed that bit.
Just the first one where we're only playing 18% is we're under the gun. So then we've gone round and we're playing, this is on a 9 max table. So we've gone around we've got around another 6 positions, and now we're on the button, and we've only obviously got the blinds to play. And this, because it's raised first in, you've only got 2 more people to act. So you're now playing a 46, just shy of 46% range, compared to under the gun, where you're playing just 18% of your hands. And a lot of them are still made up of raise to folds, because it's going to happen so much more often. Whereas the button is much wider, but these hands are still constructed in the same way. So I'm not suddenly, because I'm on the button, I'm not suddenly playing Jack 6 suited because I'm going to take it all the way to the river and win, because I'm on the button and I get to do that. I am raising Jack 6 suited because it's normally going to get folds. It's going to work as a steal. If it gets calls, well, I've got suitedness. I've got the jack. If I hit top pair, the jack might be good, because you might imagine queen kings or a king, a queen or an ace in the buttons would be re-raising, and they didn't. So it might be they're only playing smaller cards. So It's got that little bit of extra equity, but I am raising it to folds. If they free bet me or come out strong, or the flop comes out and it's all horrible and they come out, I get better. It's an easy fold. I shouldn't be playing that thinking, oh, I've hit middle pair, I should be playing this all the way because I was on the button and I get to play that way. I need to have the mindset that these hands were there in my range for a reason. They always had a plan. I can't change that plan because I get a bit because I fall in love with the cards.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense. It's important that I frame these for the value they have. So my pair of sixes, when the ball comes out 9-8-3, and I think, oh, they're not really going to be playing anything that connects with nines or eights, don't start playing my sixes like they're aces and bet, when essentially they're third pair to start with, and that's only going to get worse as more cards come out. I played my sixes because sometimes they hit a set, sometimes I can win the hand there and then. If I get all the chips in, they've got fairly decent equity, but they're not there to perform post flop with multiple bluffs on multiple streets against overcards. Like they're not there for that. Even if my opponents check in, check call, I'm playing badly there. I'm donking chips off with hands that I have never had in my range to be doing that with. There's other cards in my range that should be operating in that way, and sixes weren't part of the bluff.
Okay. I mean, this is deep stuff, I've got to say. I mean, I'm following so far, but it seems really advanced. This seems like breaking ranges down into like a more granular than I've done before.
And basically, the reason I wanted to talk through it like this is because I am still struggling to get it. This is, for me, even though I can start seeing a shed being built, I am still looking at someone telling me it should be a house and pointing to all the bricks that are still on the floor. And I'm still trying to put them up and stack them in what I think some kind of feasible wall. But there is a lot of things that are missing, and it's some things I need to work on. But it's the way both O'Kearney and Acevedo explain it in the book is in these terms. You know, these have higher equity, so we do that. These have, for me at the moment, it's difficult for me to see through that without getting this pit nailed in the first place. So they both do talk about post flop and how these continue to have equity and continue to have value, but because certain flops do change the context of that, it becomes really complicated to follow that through. So I just want to get the pre-flop nailed, understand exactly what every single one of them cards does, so that when it does go post-flop, I already knew what them cards were meant to be doing, and then it's really easy to adjust based on a flop that either changes how the hand looks. You know, sure, you're only playing, I don't know, Jack 8 offsuit as a slightly connected, slight raw equity. If you're playing big blinds, it's not too bad, but you also are happy to fold Jack 8 off if you come up against aggression, and then all of a sudden the flop comes out Jack 8. I should still be playing that cautiously, because that part of my range and what I'm doing with that was never to hit Jack 8. I weren't ever trying to do that. So I need to be playing that much more aligned. If I'm using that to balance other cards that are better, I need to be playing it how they would play it. The best part of my range, how my value part of my range should be playing, not how the non-value part of my range that suddenly spiked should be playing. Does that make sense? I don't think I was explaining that very well.
I mean, I'm kind of following. I see what keeps worrying me is all this talk of bricks and building houses, because I haven't even started building a house yet. Is that an actual thing we need to be doing? Like building an actual house?
So one thing I thought we could talk through. So I've got 4 ranges here, but for the most part, this year it follows through. Even though the specific hands we're talking about change, what they're there for follows suit no matter what position you're playing in. So I've got button and under the gun, and the stack depths are 25 big blinds and 60 big blinds for both. So there's 4 ranges, 25 big blinds, 60 big blinds. Now, what GTO does is it gives you a solid range of, you know, you do 100% with a whole bunch of holdings, and it will give you select hands that are at the bottom of your range, which are not 100%. So sometimes you fold, sometimes you raise. So, and the reason that they're 50-50, 70-30, whatever the percent difference is because they're the point of indifference. They're the bottom of your range, and you're not going to see any better equity or any worse equity, whatever action you take. So to give an example, we're looking at under the gun 25 big blinds. They're saying that king 10 off is a point of indifference. So whereas if I fold ace 10 offsuit, I'm losing some nature of value. I'm not going to get as much profit as I should if I raise ace 10 offsuit 100% of the time, unless I've got better information to exploit that way. Whereas with king 10, if I folded 100% of that or raised 100% of that, it's going to be break even. But that's the thing that's interesting, is why each of these become the point of indifference and why it changes so much based on stack depths and position, and try and see if we can dissect that, because that's not something that's really mentioned other than just a reference point. Oh, they're the point of indifference, blah, 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 and it moves on. But so we look at under the gun 25 big blinds. The point of indifference is king 10 offsuit, king 7 suited, 9 8 suited, and 7 6 suited. And what struck me is that each of them are there for different reasons. So the king 10 offsuit is there because it's got a good blocker but quite easy to fold. King 7 suited is also there, but it's got a bit more equity. Similarly, 9 8 suited doesn't have any blockers, but it's got a nice bit of connectivity. The same with 7 6, but that's the worst part of it. And whereas when you go to 60 big blinds under the gun, your point of indifference drops. So your point of indifference becomes as low as 6 5 suited. It incorporates a few of the low pocket pairs because they're now struggling to get any value because you've not got as many chips in, because you've got too many chips to get it all in. Also, interestingly, ace 3 suited becomes a point of indifference. Again, it's got a good blocker, but because you're now deeper, the 3 is going to start showing, is not going to start realizing as much equity as when you're shorter and you might be able to get them in a bit more often. It's not going to play as well. Ace 10 offsuit, similarly, are we saying that that's now part of the indifference point because it becomes weaker and weaker, it doesn't hit as good straights, and the more blinds you've got in your stack means it's not going to perform as well. You know, the deeper you go, the worse that 10 is going to be, or the less likely you are going to hit them straights because people have got more chips, so they're more likely to come along for the ride. And then moving on, so that was going under the gun, but 25 big blinds moving up to 60 big blinds. If we then go to the button, 25 big blinds, raise first in, obviously we're now seeing most of the range being incorporated, 46%. So their point of indifference is now queen 2 suited. And queen 2, as much as it's got Broadway, which is a slight blocker, you might think, well, what's that even doing in there? That's not really blocking any hands. It's not really got much equity. It's not really going to perform well post flop. Yet that's now the point where it's everything above it's meant to be good value, or good equity realization. Not realization. They've got better equity in the hand, more expected value. But when you're playing against just two other opponents playing any two cards, that queen 2 suited is now actually one of the strongest hands you can. Well, it is the point that your hand is just as strong as any other, essentially.
Okay.
And then because you've got a queen, that's fairly strong, but the 2's not even playing for most of the part. The suited's playing a little bit. The queen does block others having a queen, even though doesn't really do much. And then the other points of indifference are there for different reasons. So the queen 2 is probably the one that's there for the most equity, whereas your pocket 3s are there because if you do end up getting all your chips in, they've actually got fairly good value, whereas the 2s don't have that because they're just too low. They're not even beating, most of the standard hands. Like, they're not beating any 2 cards, even though they're already a pocket pair. Then you've got your 9-5 suited, 8-5 suited. They're the point of indifference because they've got that little bit of connectivity, but it's just a bit too far away to really benefit post flop. But they do operate quite well as the bluffs that might get called. You're not bluffing with hands that when they're called you're really struggling with. They're they might hit a flop and they might hit it really well, but most of the time they're quite easy to play. Same with 9-8 offsuit, 10-8 offsuit, and Jack-8 offsuit. They're there because they've got slight connectivity, but they're also a bit more easy to give up because they're offsuit. So even when the straight draw appears, if it's with a flush draw, you know that you're losing outs, and again, it's just throw it away. But they might have enough raw equity that when they do hit top pair or they do hit the top part of a straight, you can be pretty good against any two cards. They've got a bit more going for them. So how do you see that?
So you want us to basically, I need to understand these parts of the range to such a level that I can start to then work out for myself why those points of indifference change versus the comparing between the different stack depths and positions. I mean, so yeah, that's tough. That is tough. I mean, if we look at like the suited connectors, for instance, if we can go to like under the gun 60 big blind range and then snap between that and then the under the gun 25 big blind range. So just looking at keeping the position the same for now, the stack depth's different. So I think I understand. Or let's look at the pocket pairs, right? So under the gun 60 big blinds, we should be, the point of indifference is pocket fours, and also pocket fives are indifferent. Whereas on a smaller stack depth, under the gun, the 25 one there, they're not anymore. You only basically raise with sixes, and fours and fives don't get looking. Now, so I think the reason that is just because of what you were saying before, that they have to hit hard on the flop, which isn't going to happen often. Like they have to make a set basically to generally to realise their equity, unless you manage to get enough folds from a flop bet or whatnot. So when the stack depth is at 60 big blinds, I guess we're talking about effective stack depth here, then you've got a chance of winning a much bigger pot when you do hit that set. Whereas with 25 big blinds, you're never going to hit that set enough that even if when you do, you get all of the other person's chips, it doesn't make up for all of the times that you didn't hit your set and lost your initial bet. And I imagine if you went even higher on the stack depth from the undergun position, then pocket fours and fives wouldn't even be indifferent. They would just be, solid. You should raise 100% of the time with them. Again, for the same logic of when they hit, you can win even more in relation to all the times you've lost. So I get that bit. I understand that. It gets a bit confusing for me, and I thought what I'd need to look into is the part of this you're talking about where you're blocking your opponent's range with like the Broadway cards, and I think it's emphasizes how little I know about it when you talk about the button, and you can play things like Queen 3 suited because it blocks the Queen. If a flop came down King 8-6, I wouldn't be looking at it and think, oh great, that means I'll do this. That I'm completely clueless on.
Yeah, and I mean, it does seem, especially when it goes to things like the button opening range, where I'm sure that, I mean, I say the blocking range, it might be that the blockers are stronger than that. We are meant to be looking at maybe more the Queen 9, Queen 8, King 9, King 8s. And the Queen 2 is only there as the raw equity of a Queen against any two cards from the button and the big blind. Because it does seem fairly insignificant that out of all the aces, kings, queens that are out there, you've got a single king that can't be blocking too much. Or even, if you are saying King 8, I think it's more when you take that king out, there's just a lot less combos that are available to them that are going to be able to bet to raise you. If we took out every single king, every single combo that's got the king of spades and the 8 of spades in, it's not much, but it's enough to make a dent, because it isn't just that single card, it's every combo that could have that card, and it's just that little extra. you've got equity in your position and you've got equity in your stack depth. So your range needs to represent that, and it's how you would be building that up. I mean, I say it's how a solver would construct your range, because it needs to come from somewhere. You know what I mean? If you should be raising 46% of your hands, you need to, what makes King 6 suited a better hand to raise than 10-5 suited. And it's not simply that you've got a king that's a bit stronger. It does perform other actions which are slightly beneficial. I think the idea of blockers kind of almost came about when solvers did, because people really struggled to understand why certain actions were taken by certain cards, because it seems insignificant. It seems, why are you worried about a single card out of all the other cards that they could have? And it's that in lieu of anything else, like if there's nothing else that's going to include this hand in your range, but you need to have some cards because you've got positional advantage and you've got a stack depth to play. If you don't play it, you're losing money. So the fact it blocks combinations in their range which are good is great. It means they can never hold certain combos of ace king. That's a good thing, even though you're only sitting there with king 4. The fact that they can't hit ace king with that king is important.
So if you raise pre-flop with king 4, you're kind of hoping for a fold in the most part. But if the flop comes down king high, you're also happy enough to see that through to the river, unless it goes ridiculous, and gets really big on the betting, because you're blocking. There's less chance that he's got a king and also got top pair. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. So yeah, it does have it has that raw showdown value. It does block them. I think for the most part, it's when you're raising a hand to get folds, the less chance they've got of a hand to come back at you with, the better. So even though it's insignificant, a queen 7 suited means that they can't be holding a queen. They can't be holding a 7. They're not going to be holding the 2 clubs because you've got them 2 clubs. So they're less likely to be holding the clubs combos. And it's not much, and it's only a small percent of what is a massive wide range, but it means they've got less to beat you with than if you did exactly the same thing with 9-3 offsuit, where it won't matter that you're blocking a 9, and it certainly don't matter you're blocking a 3, because they've got all the good cards. They're above yours. Yeah, like ace 9 was not even a strong part of their range. You've not blocked at any part, whereas just blocking that queen is enough that you've reduced the combos they can have, and that gives you additional value. It's not much, but it's on the back of, okay, it's also suited, that's good. It's also got a queen in it, which has got some showdown value, that's good. I don't think it can hit a straight. I don't think it is. I think queen 8's the straight. It's that kind of, there's flops that can come out where you might still have at least one overcard. Just little things like that which give it additional value and it adds on. But the blocker it's the easiest way of describing why that's initially in your range. So it's with all this other stuff added, but the best way to define it is these have got blocker value. Let's keep them in. And that they're the most likely to benefit from blocker value later in the hand, maybe. And that's something I'd need to look into, but that does feel a bit better. That's why we might be describing them as having blocker value, because that's the most likely purpose of them.
Okay.
At later streets.
Okay. Well, this is like a whole new chapter. This is big. I need to research this. I need to read, because this is blowing my mind a little bit, if I'm honest. This is tough. This is tough. There's a lot to take in here.
So yeah, for me, there's still a lot that I'm trying to get on top of and trying to really work out, actually, is king 7 there for blocking reasons? How does that perform post flop? But for the initial mindset of what each card is there for and why, it gives me better context of how to build a range in my mind, where if I make a mistake, it's all right because I'm probably not making a mistake too far out of what it should be. Plus, I'll still be playing the hands in the right way. And that's kind of where I see it as being really important, where I'm playing the hands that I've got for the right purposes. So even though I'm playing a little bit wider or playing a bit tighter, one of the reasons why playing a bit wider or playing a bit tighter is bad is because others can then exploit that. But I'm not playing people who understand that exploit whatsoever. So if I'm playing slightly wider by accident, I don't mean to be, but I've misunderstood. I've forgotten if I should be raising with this hand in mid position or if this is a part of the button only's range. Made a mistake. It doesn't matter because I'm still doing the same with Jack 7 offsuit that I'd be doing with Jack 8 offsuit or Jack 4 offsuit. Like, I'm still performing the same actions. So I'm not likely to get to the river and think, oh no, what's happened here? I've managed to call Jack 4 offsuit, top pair, no kicker, thinking I was massive, because I would never be doing that with any of my ranges. That Jack 4 is always there for certain reasons, and that doesn't change an awful lot, other than what it was in my range for in the first place. Because as I said, as your ranges get more condensed and they do get smaller, so like when we go under the gun 25 big blinds, so many of these cards start to take on a lot more dual purposes because your range is so much stronger and so much tighter. They've got dual purpose, so they've got both blocker value as well as raw equity, as well as ball coverage. They do all three purposes because you've got so few cards to play with. But that's the benefit of having a tight range. The only reason we don't play this tight range from all positions is because when there's so few people to act behind us, we can earn money off expanding that. We can earn money off the hands that are much worse than that, but still operate in the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at.
Awesome. I mean, it seems really in depth. I need to catch up on this for sure. I think you're way ahead of me. This is a lot to consider. Like, I know what blockers are. I know what blockers are. I get some of the theories you're talking about, like the idea of the points of indifference. I'm definitely understanding parts of it. I just need it to all click together a bit more for me.
Sure. Like if I was to pick out a random hand and try to see if there's any other points of indifference that you might be able to pick out. So, okay, there's a good example. Low jack. So similar again, multi-table tournament. You're the raise first in.
How big's your stack depth?
So this is going to be 60 big blinds.
So okay, in the low jack position, did you say?
Low jack position. Yeah. So we're playing under the gun 1, 2. So we're playing under the gun +1, under the gun +2, low jack.
Low jack.
So there's your position, followed by hijack cut off button. So you bang in the middle, 60 big blinds. Your point of indifference. What would you read into your point of indifference of queen jack off? Why is that a point? Why is that not in the range? Whereas if we go down to 25 big blinds, queen jack offsuit is 100% raise. So at 60 big blinds, queen jack offsuit, you're only raising 20% of the time. The rest you fold in. But again, it's still indifferent. Whereas at 25 big blinds in the low jack, queen jack offsuit, you're raising 100% of the time. What's changed at them two blind levels, stack depths, that move it from indifference to 100% raise?
So from 60.
And I don't know if the answer to this is what.
No, I mean, I guess I need to think on that. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go on. I asked you the question. Sorry, yeah, I was butting in.
I mean, is it because? So when you're at 100 stack depths, you should play Jack Queen offsuit 100% of the time. But at 60, it's indifferent.
At 25 big blinds, it's 100%. At 60, so the deeper you go, for some reason, the deeper you go, Queen Jack offsuit is less valuable. So at 25 big blinds, Queen Jack offsuit is in your 100%. You're raising that every time. But for some reason, you've got more chips in your stack. So Queen Jack offsuit is now not performing for you. And the way I'm trying to get my mind... Go on.
It's probably because of your global frequency, like the size of your range, like how many hands should be in your range is probably quite similar for that position at both stack depths. But when you get into deeper stack depths, you want to be playing more of the speculative hands, like lower pocket pairs and the lower suited connectors. So when you've got more of the lower suited connectors and speculative hands, you'll have slightly less of the premium hands to keep that global frequency of raising the same. That's the only reason I can think of. Do you see what I mean?
And like of course.
You want your, you've got your percentages there of, like a 40% open range. You want that 40% to be the same or similar, but yeah, if you're adding speculative hands in, then you need to take them away from somewhere. So I guess it's going to be things like the cards that are at the bottom of the offsuit raising range, like Queen Jack offsuit in the low Jack position would be at 25. Yeah, then they're in at 60. But then where you're removing all of those low speculative hands, they then come back into play, and Queen Jack offsuit, you'd then play it all the time.
I mean, just to say, at 25 big blinds with less chips, you're raising 24.1% of your hands. At 60 big blinds, you're only raising 23%. So you're raising 1.1% less hands, and Queen Jack offsuit is one of them hands that's changing. So they're saying that you should be playing tighter at deeper stacks. So the reason I'm pulling this one out as a good example is because when we're playing, the way I'm seeing it, the way I'm trying to get my head into it is when we're playing at 25 big blinds, you've got Queen Jack offsuit in your hands for the fact it's got fairly decent raw equity, but because it's offsuit, because you are dominated by aces and kings, hands with ace x, king x, shall I say. Quite often, if you're going deep into a hand, you get raised free bets. But at 25 big blinds, you're close to getting all the chips in, so your raw equity is valuable. So having a queen and a jack, which beats 70% of any two cards, is valuable, because if you get called, you raise and you get called, you can quite easily get all your chips in. You can feasibly just overbet the flop and you're pretty much all in anyway. Whereas when you start getting deep, it's very difficult to get all your chips in, and you kind of don't want to with a hand that's like Queen Jack off.
Yeah, could be,
because the hand, when you're that deep, the hands that are calling you just aren't. You're going to be too strong, and you're going to be losing far too often. So that's why and it's looking back at why did we have that? If you had it in your hand as a good blocker, then that's a good time to get your chips in, because there's less good cards for them to call you with. But good blocker means nothing if you're going post flop to the turn to the river. In fact, it can actually work against you, where you don't want to be blocking them, having them hands. They're the hands that are most likely going to call you up. For instance, a queen comes down and then you hit the flush with the other cards. Like, you actually want them to have the queen that you've got, because that's the most likely hands that's going to call you when you've got the flush, but they've got queen as the top card. Does that make sense? It can actually work against you in them circumstances, because you're deeper and you're much more likely to get to the river. You need your hands to be stronger than just high card queen, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it makes sense as well, where you said actually at the deeper stack depth, you want to have a slightly tighter range, because I suppose when you're much deeper, Hey, could you just put on mute? When you're deeper, you can play slightly less hands because you can survive longer without actually having to play. You've got less reason to play, if that makes sense. You know, the blinds are much smaller comparative to your stack depth, so you can sit there for a few rotations and it's not making too much of a difference to, you know, how at risk you are. You can kind of, you know, to simplify it, you can kind of just wait for better hands because you're not getting blinded out. You're still kind of really deep stacked. Whereas when you get shorter stacked down to 25, you're a bit more desperate. You're kind of like, yeah, you can wait, but you can't wait too long because the blinds are going to start eating up a bigger percentage of your stack each rotation. And if that happens, then you do need to just, all right, I need to take a bit more of a chance. It kind of forces you to increase the risk, you know, and increasing the risk just goes hand in hand, you know, with playing a slightly wider range. So that bit makes sense as well. So that all kind of makes sense. It all kind of connects, doesn't it? You know, deeper stack depths, play a tighter range for that reason, and then that's why then your points of indifference change, because you've got less hands and they're the ones that get eradicated from the bottom of the range first.
Yeah, and the other side is, for me, it's also working out the times that you're taking different cards out to what might be seen as the obvious candidates for, you know, if you're trying to play a tighter range, why would Queen Jack offsuit be taken out of your hand before King Six suited? And then it's working out.
That's the bit. That's the bit I want to. This is the bit I want to look into, right? I want to look into these, like how you're supposed to play things like King Six suited, Queen Three suited, you know, on the button at a deep stack depth. Is there what to do with those and why they're in there? Is it just because you should be playing a much bigger range when you're on the button, and you just need to put something there? But what's the maths? You know what? It's definitely something to look into.
Yeah, and I mean, fully comprehending this will need us to move away to, first of all, 3 bets, 4 bets defense.
Yeah, this feels like you've just accelerated us maybe a year down the line. That's what this feels like.
We haven't even seen a flop, let alone a turn on a river. But I think this all forms a big part of how it's put together, what we need to start expecting. But another part of this is trying to expand on this and look at this in a way that helps me adjust when I'm trying to exploit. So I can add different cards, or I can change what I'm doing with my range, and I know exactly what part of it I'm extending and why. So I'm not thinking, okay, I'm playing against a bunch of people who are pretty passive, pretty weak, and they're just playing a real limp call strategy. So I'm going to play wider because I think I can exploit. But
where are you going to widen it? No, that makes perfect sense. Like where exactly would you want to widen your range? At what part? What parts of the range should you widen? That's cool, man. Yeah. That is really cool. And this is what I mean. This feels like a whole. It's almost like, we were finally starting to feel a little bit in control of it, and then you've just gone whack. What about this? This is going to change your life. And it feels like, yeah, this could be like a huge new part of it, you know, a big step.
Yeah, I feel that this is the part of range construction which goes from just understanding how to play good poker and, you know, multi-table on autopilot, to genuinely looking at a player, looking at what they've just done. So a great example for me was someone who overvalues an ace. Now, if they're overvaluing an ace, me having an ace in my hand is a bad thing because I'm going to be blocking their ace. I don't want to be doing that. So what part of my range do I want to open up so that I can exploit them playing aces terribly? And it will probably be the one, I don't know, I am guessing, I don't know this, but it'd be something like Jack 10 suited. I'd be playing a lot more, and I'd be maybe 3-betting or 4-betting where I normally wouldn't, whereby when I hit a flop or a turn really strong, I know that they're going to be coming along with any ace, and that's really good for my, because I can get away from it so easily, because Jack 10's dominated so often that when it hits good, I can not only get value, but I can get maximum value every single time, because they're not folding that ace. They love it. But I'm not going to be able to exploit that by just sticking extra aces in my range, because that's counterproductive. But knowing that I can't just start sticking any other hand in, I can't start sticking Jack 5 suited in, thinking, well, they can still have an ace. Anytime a Jack comes, I'm going to win. And it's like, it's not how it works. I need to be putting in the cards that make sense for the counter that I'm trying to do. So I don't want to put my good blockers in. I don't want to put in the raw equity high raw equity cards, because their ace is the one that's doing that. I can't counter that with a worse hand. It's just not going to work. So I need to now look at good equity, poor realization. What hands are generally wouldn't have good realization, but because I can read their aces so well, they've all of a sudden their realization goes up really well. So they're going to realize a lot more equity than they normally would, because I can tell straight off when this player's got an ace they can't fold.
Yeah, for sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the value you expect to get is much higher when you know they've got that ace, and you get a flop. You get a flop that you hit hard, but it's got an ace on it, for sure.
Just as an interesting point of discussion, and it is a peculiarity specifically with the low jack, which is why I've picked it off on this solver's chart. Can you think of why the queen jack offsuit at 60 big blinds, low jack, is played far less frequently than queen 10 offsuit? This could simply be a solver peculiarity. Sometimes apparently solvers do this because they're playing so many hands. Some of them, it makes no difference really, and they just stick it in there as a nice easy, this works out equilibrium, so it just moved on, rather than having an actual defined. The reason queen 10's in there is because I don't know why it would be. Why would queen 10 offsuit be more valuable and played more often than queen jack offsuit? In fact,
in what circumstance would it be?
So they're saying if you played queen jack offsuit 100 times, you should only be raising it 20% or 10%, should I say? It's probably only 10%, and 90% of the time you fold it. So it's
what stack depth? Or just any?
60 stacks, 60 big blinds. Whereas queen 10 offsuit, you're playing probably about 70% of the time.
Well,
so why is
that's a weird one?
Why is the queen 10? The only thing I can
maybe because I don't know. Is it because? Geez, I don't know. Is the queen jack blocking jacks that you want them to have, whereas queen 10 isn't, so they could have more jacks in their range, like things like jack 9. I don't know, man.
I don't know. I'm looking at the things I'm looking at the moment are like, is it that it needs more coverage, so it prefers the 10s as the coverage because the jacks are already well covered by the strong part of your range, because you're only playing 23% of your hands anyway, so people assume you're going to have down to the jack, so you include a few of the 10s to give you a little bit better coverage, so that when a 10 lands you're more likely to hit. But then you've got all the 10s up to ace 10 suited, all suited 10 there.
It might actually, and this is a bit off the wall, but this might be solely to do with Phil Hellmuth and just how much he hates coming up against people that play queen 10 and beat him. And it might be that it's got nothing to do with equity or equity realization or expected value. It's just the huge value there is in beating Phil Hellmuth with Queen 10 when we know he hates it so much. Maybe it's that.
Can you imagine the AI was? Well, there is the slight outside chance that the AI was written based on data obtained from people who understood that, even though it was tens and hundreds of millions of hands. The general feel was
still factored. It's still factored in.
the feel factor actually came in.
So many people knew about that it just factored in.
Yeah.
That's insane to think that. Yeah.
The only other thing I can think.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, the only other thing I can think is one thing that I've loved about GTO ranges is where certain cards which seem weaker than other cards are actually better raises. So, for instance, you might be calling with ace-8 suited, ace-7 suited, but raising with ace-4 suited because obviously you want to get coverage because it then turns the wheel, but actually because ace-4 suited is raising in that position starts getting folds from better hands. So ace-7, ace-8, ace-9 suited, you're blocking the 7 or the 8 or the 9, so you're more likely to only get calls from better hands, and you're going to fold the ace-4s, the ace-3s, whereas ace-4 might now start getting folds from ace-7, ace-8, ace-9, and that's you're now getting equity by getting better hands to fold. So that could be that the Queen 10 falls into that range. Queen 10 being raised will fold out King Jack offsuit a bit more often, Queen Jack offsuit. That it just has that little bit better value because it's still connected, it's can still do a job post flop, and it can now get a few of these other hands that are better than it to fold. So it could be that. I like that, and I do love that part of range construction. The all of a sudden thinking, why is a weaker hand doing more here? And it's because
it's like
getting better hands to fold. And it's when someone says it's like, oh, of course, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's understanding it. It's like what I'm learning on these ranges. It's all very well, but I kind of need to understand a bit more about why. And this seems like you're delving into the realms of why, which is obviously what we need to do, because when you're playing, an actual game of poker, you do need to be able to adjust for the right reasons. You need to be able to look at your opponents and say, well, he's making a mistake here. I need to adjust my range, and this seems like it's knocking on the door of knowing where to adjust and how to adjust your range to exploit.
Yeah. If someone's completely indifferent to your bets, you don't need to worry about adding block. You just raise with the strongest part of your range. You focus it on that. You start getting rid of some trash. Whereas if people are playing only the best part of their range, you need to work out how to block that as well as how to develop other bits of your range to play a bit wider, because they're playing so tight that it's not possible to just tighten up to point of zero because they're only playing the best hand. You want to be raising them a lot more often because they're going to get folded more often. So yeah, the other reason I thought we'd have this chat is because this is saying I'm sure I'm making decisions in play that are actually bad decisions because I don't understand this enough, and I'm trying to implement something I don't know. But I really feel we're going to visit this multiple times on our journey. This is something we'll come back to and then think, oh wow, can you imagine? Can you hear what we were saying back then about why you're using 7?
We didn't even know what the raise fold part of a range was.
Can you hear him saying that Queen 4's got a blocker? Yeah, well done, mate. Okay, sure.
Yeah, probably. I'd love to think we're going to be so well versed in it that we laugh at our previous selves. Ha ha ha! Stupid 2023 Tain and Jon.
Cool. Okay, it's been really in depth today. Apologies for hardcore theory for stuff that I don't even know, which has made it harder.
This feels like maybe this is good learning for us, or to sort of open our eyes to some new things that we need to learn. I don't know what that was like listening in, me and Tain just trying to wrap our heads around something, but you're on the journey with us. This is what it's all about. So hopefully that's kind of inspired you guys to have a look into this as well.
John, just before we go, because everyone's had a really hard time and you're probably desperate to get to bed, could I try what I hope's a bit of fun, but it actually will help me?
Yeah.
So I briefly mentioned this before we came on. Basically, as I'm driving along and I'm listening to podcasts, or I'm listening to a poker audio book or something like that, or even just I'm talking to myself, rambling on about certain poker things, any thoughts that come to my mind, the best I've got is shouting at Google to make a note for me. And Google's really bad at it because Google doesn't grasp poker terminology. Google just doesn't put it in. It assumes I must be talking about something else. So can you help me decipher some of these notes?
Okay.
If that's all right with you?
Yeah, yeah. So this is Google's attempts at making notes whilst you're driving along, listening to a podcast. Okay.
Some of these might actually be talking about today. So one of them is in pub game when there's loads of linky, linky,
Limpers.
can you live? Limper. Oh yeah, I'm going with limpers. So let's put that limpers. Can you live from early? So you can. So you can. Oh yeah. So you can free bet more often, but it's free as in FREE. Right. Yeah. Got it. Perfect. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So yeah. Do you know? Whereas I was saying, like, yeah, if you limp, knowing that when someone does raise behind you, you can then start free betting with abandon. That's going to get a lot more folds, but you only want to do that with specific hands. Listening to Carlos. Next one. Mini spare. Oh no, that's coming off the back of one. Oh yeah, sorry. Mini spares are best for this. I think that was in relation to the previous one. Mini spares are best for this. Must be.
Minimum raises?
I think it's small pairs, mini pairs. Small pairs are best for this, and it would be small pairs are best where they're not going to get particularly good. They're going to perform absolutely terribly multi-way. Okay. But if you're 3 or 4 betting and getting them quite a lot of that, and it's going to achieve a lot of folds, you're actually going to realise a lot better equity because there's a lot of dead money that you'll also be winning. So that makes up for the lack of stack depth that you might have. Okay, that makes sense. Maybe do this with our hands or only have good showdown value like my tears. Maybe do this with our hands, only have good showdown value like my tears. My tears have good showdown value, apparently. I don't know.
Like high pairs? Like high pairs?
Like high pairs. It could be high pairs. Cheers, Google. You're really helpful.
Yeah.
And then this one, I think, is a standalone comment. Who is this to combat lots of calls with hands that are strong but don't like lots of calls? Oh, no, I think this is the same point again. Who is this to combat lots of calls with hands that are strong but don't like lots of calls?
Oh, man, I don't know. Who is this?
This is so complex. I tried to do this in the most simple language for this reason. It still doesn't have it. I think what I was saying was if you're getting lots of calls and your hand performs terribly against multiple opponents, you raise to get the folds that you require to get closer to heads, more likely to be heads up. Right, there is so many of these, but I'll leave it at that because it will make me cry trying to decipher some of the other stuff.
I've just got a couple that I want to read from my Alexa shopping list. That I've just had to. So the first one is amateur powder.
Amateur chowder or powder?
Amateur powder. Powder.
Ancho, is it chili? Is that a type of chili?
Amateur.
Ancho chili?
Oh, you know what it is? You know what? I know what it is. It's amateur, which is basically like dried mango powder. I think Amchur's
Yeah.
maybe Amchur's like the Indian name for it or something. And I've read the packet or something like that, and it didn't quite know what I was talking about.
I've used that in samosas.
I haven't got any more, but I have got one that's quite interesting. I asked Alexa to put on my shopping list materials to make a bomb, and she just put it on my shopping list, no question. No question. There was no like, what are you doing that for? There was no please come knocking. It was just like, I've added this to your shopping list.
So
I think
how long ago was this like 6 months ago and you've got away with it, or is it that was half hour ago? They're going to cut the pod off.
This was in the last few weeks.
Oh, so there's enough time passed that the police are doing a bad job if that was on someone's radar, or they're following us. They're now listening in on the pod and they're avid listeners. Hiya, please.
I mean, I suppose would people put materials to make a bomb on their Alexa shopping list? Probably not. Just trying to find some more.
I don't know. There's a level of person that doesn't even think that far beyond. Anyway, I've had one on my shopping list today. Just the word key. K-E-Y.
Just key. Kiwi?
Nope.
No.
Definitely not. Really important. Key.
Oh,
and I know I needed it.
I've got one that says...
and Isle of Wight. Isle of Wight came up. What the hell could Isle of Wight be other than the actual Isle of Wight?
Isle of Wight. I've got bolognese beans. Bolognese beans. I think that's probably Belotti beans that I sometimes use.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying you needed a cream for.
Anyway, this pod has like hit rock bottom tonight. We've just gone into ridiculous.
I think we burnt ourselves out, so we just
burnt ourselves out by blowing our minds with this, range construction. It's fantastic, and it's great to have it on the radar. But yeah, I am zapped.
Well, I mean, I know we say it at the start of every pod, but for my own sake, please don't take what we're doing as advice. We've both been really trying to muddle our way through this, and
this one
don't go gambling your house thinking the Tain and Jon told me that I want to put blockers in my range, so I started raising with King 2 offsuit under the gun. Why is this?
We are learning this one. We've come at this one very just accepting that we are just don't even really know what it is overly. Just something that.
But do raise Queen 10 offsuit. So Queen's
resuited. All in. Gosh. All right. Anything else before we wrap up, Tain?
No, it's all good. Cheers.
Cheers, Tain. Thanks for listening, guys.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks.